Dear colleagues, thank you so much for being here. We will now hold the discussion which is called Complexities of Solidarity. This discussion is being made within the frameworks of the Ukrainian program at this Buchmesse, and we're very proud to have this discussion and to have this dialogue. So this discussion is made thanks to Frankfurter Buchmesse, but also thanks to Goethe Institute Ukraine, thanks to PEN Ukraine, Ukrainian Book Institute, and Art Arsenal, Mistecki Arsenal, Ukrainian art institution. I will be very glad to present our speakers today. They're both Ukrainian and non-Ukrainian, and this is, I think, very important combination. I will start with Olesia Ostrovska-Luta, who is the Director General of Mistecki Arsenal, the Art Arsenal. Please welcome her here. Also, I'm very glad to have here Raji Abdul Salam, who represents the Reckoning Project, which is, I think, a groundbreaking project, international project in Ukraine, but also around Ukraine, to document Russian war crimes. And Raji has also lots of experience of working with other horrible wars, in particular with in Syria. So I think we will discuss lots of things with him today. Please welcome. And last but not least, Denis Yücel, who represents PEN Berlin, who is a spokesperson of PEN Berlin, a very dynamic organization of writers here in Germany. Please welcome. So our task today is to understand what are these complexities of solidarity, how is it called? I forgot to present myself, but that's the least important thing. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I'm the president of PEN Ukraine, and Ukrainian philosopher and writer. So let me start with this reflection, because we have both Ukrainian and non-Ukrainian writers and speakers here. And let me start with kind of trying to enlarge the very question of solidarity during the war. And I will start with Raji, because it is when Ukrainians were facing these horrible situations, when Russians started bombarding our hospitals, when there were evacuation convoys from such towns as Bucha just shelled and killed by the Russian soldiers without any pity. We travel a lot in Ukraine right now, and we go to the frontline areas, and when you see the story of a maternity house in Vilnyansk near Zaporizhia, where a 2-day child was killed because Russians bombarded this maternity hospital. The recent event, horrible event, when Russians just shelled a village with a high-precision weapon, Groza, near Kupiansk in Kharkiv region, where actually more than 50 people died, and this is half of the village. And we see clearly this pattern of addressing and targeting the civilians and the crowds of people. And tragically, we all see these, our friends who are dying every day. But you also study other experience. Can we say that, for example, if we take the Assad-Russian war in Syria, for example, can we see the same patterns? Because there are Syrian people, Syrian doctors, for example, who were telling Ukrainian doctors, don't put the red crosses on your cars because you will be bombarded, because Russians target precisely the medical personnel, the hospitals. How can you elaborate on this, maybe on these parallelities between this cruelty, and these parallels in cruelty also creates a certain parallels of empathy, because we see these patterns coming from one war to another? Raji.
Thank you so much for having me here. And if I want to start to talk about it, I will take you even more before even Syria. The first ways that we can document that the Russian or the Russian leadership showed such behaviors that started as a small phenomena is in Chechen war. The way that how they dealt with Grozny, the city, the way that I think also there is an element of, I don't know if I can use the word narcissism, when you believe a certain reality and when, like a small child, when you see this reality does not met with the real reality on the ground, you start to be angry, and the way that you started to have these crazy emotions, and it goes on. Imagine someone who has so much power, and he has a vindictive way of doing stuff, started to do and repeat these things again and again. In Chechnya, we've seen how they destroyed the city, how they targeted every protected category from women, children, and even priests, name it, hospitals. The list is so long. And this one, no one talks about it. So the Russians didn't find anyone to stop them there. Then they took it to Syria, and they did it in a bigger scale. So we started to see the pattern better. And also we started to have more of a new ways of documenting. We have the digitization of evidence. So we started to keep these records. And they moved to Ukraine, and they are doing things that they did in Syria in a bigger scale. And if no one stops them in Ukraine, these patterns from impunity, from sponsoring impunity, from making sure that their soldiers hide their identity so they do widespread attack again and again and again. And they are so cheap. They don't need to use heavy artillery and precision missiles to do these things, you know? It's so cheap when you let your soldiers with no disciplinary action against them. They will loot, they will kill, they will rape, you know, non-stop. And this is the cheapest way that you let your army to do all this destruction, because the main objective that we see from the Russian war is to subdue the Ukrainian population. So how they will do that, when they have this idea in their head that Ukrainian people will be so hospitable, and like if you go for the narrative itself, you know, in the beginning, we are coming to liberate the Ukrainian people from a certain blah, blah, blah narrative. And then you see how it's built on that they are shocked. And then you see how their media started to change. And also we documented how the media started with, we want to liberate, to we are shocked, and then it goes down to, these people are not humans. So there is an element of dehumanizing the people, you know, and then they start to incite violence through their media, make their population accept that, and then they multiply it by the precision, by the destruction that you see. Because I would feel very empathetic if I find 2 days child killed. But if someone is building in my head, these are cockroaches, these are non-humans, these are rats, whatever you want to name the way that they would say it, I will be desensitized and I will accept such violence because I don't feel the person in front of me as an equal. I'm going to stop here to let the discussion for other colleagues.
Thank you very much for raising this dehumanization story, because I do think that the origins of these genocidal wars that Russia is, or other regimes are making all around the world, are actually born in the heads and in the minds. And when we are in Ukraine analyzing the Russian propaganda, sometimes the discourse in the West is like, okay, propaganda is primarily about disinformation, about sending lies and fake news. And I think this is a very narrow approach, because the key goal of propaganda is precisely to dehumanize, to prepare for the war, to justify the war. So let me ask you, Olesya, because we are in Ukraine and we are facing this story of dehumanization, quite a long story of dehumanization. Do you think we can actually move not into this particular war, but do you think this dehumanization, which you can call, you know, is going on now, but also you can say it was present in the Soviet Union and then Russian Empire, etc. Do you think it has its like deep roots, cultural roots?
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. First of all, I'm happy to be here. And before I start answering your question directly, let me just build a little bit on what Raja has just said. As you were speaking, I was also trying to remember my own experience, and you said that the first examples or instances of this extreme violence we can find already in Chechnya. But then I thought about a little story about my own thoughts. Once Bucha, the small town next to Kiev, a suburb where extreme atrocities happened in March 2022, was uncovered. That day I was in Kiev, and I got a call from my friend Katya Botanova, who is here in the audience, and she said something which I thought was very, very precise. She said, what we see now is shocking but not surprising. And how is that not surprising? That's because all the stories, I'm from Western Ukraine, and Western Ukraine became a part of Soviet Union after World War II. So my grandparents lived through this process. And the stories that they told us in the families were structurally just the same as the stories from Chechnya, as you've just mentioned. So that fell into very, very familiar narrative. And then I thought that this extreme violence that we see from Russian troops now in this war are not an accident but a method. And the method, now we're coming to your question. So the method is to dehumanize and to inflict extreme violence, extreme suffering, to prevent from rebelling, from resisting. And this is something which you can recognize immediately as a Ukrainian person, and I'm sure people in other parts too. So that definitely has a deep root. And there is also one problem, in my opinion, and I would say there is a sort of consensus on Ukrainian cultural scene that what we expected from our Russian counterparts, from Russian cultural scene and intellectual scene right at the beginning of the invasion, we expected some reflection on that. How does that happen? Why that happened? And there was nothing like that. And one problem that is very clear, I think, is that there is no self-reflection within Russian cultural scene on those issues such as dehumanization of others. Like, for example, Volodya and me, we both grew up with funny Soviet jokes where you always had a few funny ethnical minorities in them. Always, those were Siberian people, they were the funniest. Or Moldovan people, they were funny too. And that was never absolutely reflected. I think the problem also comes from that, from the lack of questioning.
I think another problem also
Yeah.
the fact that there is a certain element of Russian imperialism which we try always to stress, is that the idea that the tool of domination is not the idea of difference. So you're not different from us, you're the same from us. And all the difference is considered as the deviation. And that's a very interesting and important logic I think we also need to understand. Let me ask you less about art, of course, and about culture. This is your field. We have had lots of, examples of the solidarity from artists from abroad, from cultural communities from abroad, from writers, from painters, from musicians. There were remarkable story of musicians, rock musicians and pop musicians, famous all over the world, taking the Ukrainian songs and singing them or singing together. But at the same time, as we are talking about complexities of solidarity, right, there are still so many things that that Ukrainians with our friends from abroad have different opinions about. like the attitude to Russian culture, the attitude to renaming of streets, the attitude to memory, etc. How, first, do you feel these complexities? Do you feel that that sometimes we need to go ahead while understanding that we might disagree on certain points? Or you rather feel that there is something still not explained and not understood with our friends abroad?
Well, first of all, I think we are still in the process of thinking ourselves. We are still in the process of building a vocabulary for our experience. And we are relying very much at the moment on decolonial theory, but maybe we have to think it deeper. We have to think it through, and maybe not all the elements of it would be or would describe our reality perfectly. But that is just, we are at the beginning of this process, and there is a lot of discussion on that within Ukrainian intellectual community. And there are also two, I think, elements how solidarity is difficult, why solidarity is rather difficult. One is that once you have different situation and experience, you have also different temporality. Time goes differently in different situations. In those, for example, in the front line right now in Ukraine, there is a very different feeling of time than we have here, and then we have in Kiev, and then we have in western parts of Ukraine, depending on the physical experience. And secondly is the physical experience. Without certain physical experience, it's extremely hard to imagine things. It's extremely hard to convey the message and to solidarize with the speaker, with the speaking person. Here, once again, let me introduce a small, very tiny personal story. About a month and a half ago, I met on an official occasion. I met a friend. He's a director of Ukrainian Remembrance Institute, Anton Drobovich, and he's also a soldier fighting on the front line. But he was wounded, and for that reason, he was sent for rehabilitation to Kiev. That's why I met him. And we started to talk to each other, and I asked him, Anton, how is it on the front line? And he was trying to explain it to me, and then he said, but you understand. And I thought that no, without his physical experience, I do not understand. So even we in Ukraine have those very different temporalities and understandings, let alone, people in other places.
I think that's a very important point, and maybe we will come back to this, because there is a certain idea that Ukraine is unified society, which is, very solid from inside, and that overcome many of its divisions. But then I think if you dig deeper, you understand how many new divisions are there. And these divisions are the divisions of experience. And when we're talking about complexity of solidarity, it's also a question about our internal complexity. But I will address this later, but coming now to Denise, and Olesa mentioned this physical reality, this physical feeling, which you cannot really have from the image that you have on your phone. We first met with Denise in Kramatorsk. Kramatorsk is a frontline city in Ukraine, 30-40 kilometers from the front line, and it's like a fortress city. Several fortress cities where actually soldiers come back from their positions to have some rehabilitation, to have some rest. So it really looks like a military fortress. And we met with Denise because Denise brought the fireworks machines, fire trucks to Kharkiv. And this is how we met. So we didn't meet in Berlin, we didn't meet on Frankfurt, we meet in a very dire place, which is Kramatorsk. And to make the story even more kind of sad for us, for me, we also had a dinner in that restaurant, which is called Ria Pizza, where our dearest friend Victoria Amelina, Ukrainian writer, would be killed in a couple of months afterwards in this precise restaurant by the Russian missile and direct hitting, which is clearly a war crime. But you coming, right? You see this reality physically. You show your solidarity with actually coming to Ukraine. And then you come back to Germany. And Germany is obviously a country which is a big Ukrainian ally, and we feel this solidarity and we feel this strong support without any doubt. But then there are some discussions in Germany which kind of are very difficult for us, like whether to give weapons to Ukraine, how fast to give weapons to Ukraine, etc. And I understand this certain, thinking in Germany that tries to avoid war, that tries to avoid evil, that kind of avoids the need to confront the evil. How do you see this reality in Germany right now? How do you see these complexities of solidarity? Where are we now? Where are we going? What problems we have in this? Maybe if there are some things that still need to be better explained and understood.
I think it would be easier, or it would be another answer to this question if you would ask me 2 weeks before 7th of October, before the attack of Hamas against Israel. So, talking about, because I think it will have an influence not only in Germany, in the whole Western world. You can see this on the book fair. So last year it was the main topic, the main political topic, not only in this stage, at the whole book fair, was Ukraine. Now it is not like that. I mean, it's not only Ukraine is on the second row. The second big topic of last year was Iran, the uprising against the mullah regime of the women, and this is nearly completely forgotten. And last year, you remember, not only in Germany, not only at the book fair, the Xinjiang, Azadi, it was a scream all over the world. This regime, this dictatorship is still on power, and the solidarity or even to care for it has gone. So Ukraine is not, I think it's not so forgotten like Iran, but I think it will the escalation of the conflict between Hamas and Israel, and we don't know how it will continue, but it will have an impact to German politics against Ukraine and to the whole solidarity thing. Maybe I've got to explain a bit, to talk a bit about this fire trucks issue, because that was also related with the Frankfurt Book Fair. Last year, we had a panel on a big stage, not on this, but another big stage here with Sergei Shadan, who was awarded last year, the Ukrainian writer from Kharkiv. He was awarded with a Peace Prize, and it was for us very impressive to see that Sergei is phenomenon. He's a musician, he's a writer, but in Kharkiv, he made the experience that it can be a situation that writing and talking or making music or writing books, it's not enough. So he organized the practical help. And that was for us, this meeting with Sergei here in Frankfurt was the point to say, okay, let's do something in practice. Even it's not our job as writers, as journalists, it's not our business to organize some fire trucks and generators and water tanks, but that was necessary. If it's not solidarity, of course, symbolic solidarity is important, but if you have the opportunity to go in practice with solidarity, we should do this. So unfortunately for me, it was not possible. For us, it was not possible to bring some Patriot records to Kharkiv, because it's forbidden by law, and I think it's not so much more expensive than to buy some fire trucks and generators. But that was the idea, solidarity. If you have the possibility, and of course for everyone, for every citizen, the possibilities are different. But we started a campaign, a donation campaign. It was 300,000 euro, and we bought some fire trucks. And the point of the fire trucks was because the Russian, after We left Kharkiv. There were many villages around Kharkiv without water, without electricity, and it was not fire trucks for fighting against fire. It was the idea with the fire trucks and the generators. We spent the most of the money for these generators to bring mobile power stations and water tanks to the Kharkiv region. And it's not, of course, not only Sergei. You and your colleagues from Pan Ukraine, you did the same. That's why we meet at Kramatorsk. And I think it's an important point even for people like I'm journalists, but we are writers. But sometimes if there can be a situation, sometimes there are situations that solidarity has to go in practice. So that's what we tried to do with this action. You remember, Volodymyr, when we sat in this restaurant, which was attacked now. You asked me, will Germany deliver these panzers, these tanks? And I said, yes, believe me. I said, maybe you remember, maybe there will be something like a second Bucha has to happen, unfortunately, but Germany will do this. And I think this discussions in Germany, I understand you in Ukraine, why you are angry because Germany was at the beginning very slowly, but I think in Germany it was an interesting situation. At the beginning of the war, there was a few 100,000 people at a big demonstration in Berlin. I was completely surprised about this because in Germany, not only in Germany, but also in Germany, in history, there was kind of view like this: if the Americans are involved, there's a war. If the Americans are not involved, there's not a war. So the Iraq was a war, but Yugoslavia, even it's closer to Germany, the civil war in Yugoslavia, the massacres in Srebrenica, the genocide, was not such a topic like this. So I was surprised that so many people were on the street, but that was on symbolic way. So, and then to go one step forward, to do what Germany and the West can do to help to support Ukraine, to deliver the weapons that you need, because unfortunately it is necessary to defend with weapons. I don't like that, but that's reality. And I think it was in Germany, it was a hard discussion, but it was a discussion, and I think it took a long time. I understand why you say it was too long, but I think it goes to the right direction from the beginning of the war to now. And now I think we will have a different situation after 7th of October because I'm a bit fear of that Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, that we are used that there's a war and it's still ongoing, so it's not the news any longer. The news things are happening there, and I'm scared that I'm fear of that it will be forgotten here in Germany.
We also have this fear, and we have this experience of a forgotten war. I remember all the discussions organized in Germany or somewhere else in 2016, 2017, for example, under the title of a forgotten war. And I have this nightmare that this war, this full-scale invasion, will also be considered as a forgotten war. But let me just ask you again about this mode of thinking, because this is very important, I think. This Zeitenwende in Germany, right? Do you have this idea, do you have this feeling that it is really the change in the way that the society understands that, for example, you cannot just avoid evil, or you cannot just think that all the evil can be, all the bad things that happening can be solved only by dialogue, only by conversation? Because this is what we feel in Ukraine about Germany, that this is, and we understand why is that, because it's post-Second War, World War, and all these ideas of an infinite dialogue are very important for the society. But at some point it's not enough. At some point you need to understand that you have to confront this evil, you have to defend against it.
I think it's not only, I think it's an easy it's not only the Second World War experience. I think, especially for the German Social Democrats, it was the experience of the East politics in the 17th. It was the Helsinki Conference. It was part of it, and I think, especially in the Social Democrats, more than any other party in Germany, had still the idea need some time to recognize that Putin is not Brezhnev, and all the dialogue that especially the German government had in the last 20 years with the Russian government, there was not there was nothing like the Helsinki Conference, nothing like the Charta 77, which civil rights activists in Eastern Europe used for their struggle. So there was nothing like it was only one side. We get the gas for less money and make some business, but that was not a dialogue like in the 17th. So. And I think that especially the German Social Democrats need some time to recognize this, but I don't agree in this. I think the German society has learned in the last 1.5 years, and in the beginning of the war, it was more the German society, the majority of the society, who said, yes, we need to support Ukraine. It was the government and the Social Democrat part of the government, not the Green part. The German, because of some reasons, most hated minister, Robert Habeck, he said 1 year before the war starts, he said, we have to deliver weapons to Ukraine. So I think it is all the anger against all the angry and disappointment I see in Ukraine. I understand this, but I think maybe you can... There's a development in German society, and I think it was a development in the right direction, of course with discussions, with fears from, and that's how it will, the impact on the energy prices become higher, and the fear for Third World War, and all those things. But I think that's also part of being a democracy, to discuss things like this. And there was a discussion. I think it was a serious discussion, and at the end it go in a right direction.
Olese, you wanted to add something?
Yes, I also wanted to reflect on the question, is there a difference between artistic action and direct practice? Or is direct practice needed? Is it enough to have just an artistic practice in times of tragedies? I don't want to use the word crisis, because crisis, in my feeling, does not describe this worldview. So let me tell you about how Ukrainian artists react to the war. What I've noticed is that often in Ukrainian visual art especially, there is a blurred margin between fictional and non-fictional reality, between the reality and artistic thinking. And one of the most prominent artworks was made by the Ukrainian artist Zhanna Kadyrova. And Zhanna Kadyrova she makes sculptures. She was one of those artists who evacuated from Kiev at the beginning of the invasion, and she went to Carpathian mountains, and there are mountain rivers there, which with the banks laid with pebble stones. And pebble stones, large pebble stones, they look like bread loaves. So Zhanna made sculptures out of those stones. She cut them just like you would cut a bread loaf, and called them bread loaf. And it's very, very multi-layered in Ukraine, because also at the very same time there was a widespread joke, because we also joked even at the beginning of the invasion, and there was this joke that, how do you recognize a Russian saboteur in Ukrainian city? You asked him or her to say palanetsa, and palanetsa means bread loaf, and Russian speakers usually have an accent in that specific word. So you would know that this is not a Ukrainian speaker, so probably a saboteur. So to make the story, or long story short, it's not only the sculpture, but also how Zhanna presents those sculptures. They can be bought from her, and she's very well known. So they've been bought by many museums and private collections all around the world, and all the money that she gets from the sale of those sculptures altogether, and those are by now hundreds of thousands of euros, she donates to Ukrainian army. And they only exist as an artwork together with this act. So it's both an artwork and a fundraiser, with something very counterintuitive to previous idea of how to be an artist. You, as an artist, you were not supposed to support an army, right? And there is another layer of thinking in that, when you said that it was common to think that bad things can be stopped by restraining from aggression. And now there is some sort of understanding that this thinking also comes from comes from probably a former aggressor who is restraining itself, who does not want to be an aggressor. But it would be a very different thinking if it would come from the one who is attacked. So probably
yes, I do think that this question whether art can be engaged or not engaged is not really the question that Ukrainians are asking, Ukrainian writers and artists. And so it's really, you have to be engaged, you have to be practical, there are lots of people who are in the army, lots of other people who are helping the army. But let me address Raji and maybe continue a little bit with a follow-up with this idea of practical outcomes of solidarity. But we're not talking about just supplying some things or helping the army, we're talking about justice. And this is a very important thing. This is what you're doing in the Reckoning project. The idea is you combine journalists and legal experts, and you think that you can collect evidence of crimes and then bring the perpetrators to justice. But also coming back to the cases that you mentioned, how these things are connected. Like, can we connect those, like the results of those people, like you who worked on the crimes of Assad regime and Russia in Syria? What were their achievements, and can Ukraine build on these achievements, like, for example, the idea of creating a special tribunal for Putin?
First of all, before we start this, I just have to, because you mentioned the word evil, and you mentioned the word solidarity. We will jump for the question, but if you give me 2 minutes just to, because within the West or within European countries or within Germany, from my experience of 2 years living here after decades of living in the Middle East and decades working in litigation under universal jurisdiction and international criminal law and other capacities to collect testimonies and build cases, I want to start with one step. What we defined as evil, and we draw a line between what is good and what is bad, or what is good and what is evil, the other side, and in such cases is the Russian government or regime, they don't see it as evil. They see it as an acceptable act. What happened in Chechnya, we accept it as persons, as international society. They moved to Syria. The same tactics, and this will take us to the second one, what is the connection? The same leadership that used tactics endangering the life of civilians in Aleppo, the same leadership is now active in Ukraine. They did in Mariupol the same thing that they did in Aleppo. They did crimes against humanity that start by besieging cities, destroying facilities that is vital for the survival of the population, making sure that, for example, one of the things how they took it in a greater level in Ukraine, if you destroy a power station and cut the electricity in Aleppo, in winter, people will be cold, but will not die because of cold. But in Ukraine, if you cut electricity, people die because of cold. In Aleppo, it goes 11, 13. We can just put some blanket, we can survive. But in Ukraine, people were like really dying because of that. The thing is, the same people are using the same endangering tactics in a greater level. And if God forbid, we fail, or the political will force a certain solution, I don't know what it is, we don't stop the Russian in Ukraine, they will do these crazy things, crimes against the humanity. These patterns will take it to the second grade scale, and it will be in a different country. You know, for that solidarity is very important. The people who were like, know nothing about Ukraine, in Aleppo, in Homs, in so many places, they are in solidarity. We have complete Syrian international and national and local civil society traveling to Ukraine to show their solidarity, to share their experiences, because they feel the heat of the things. We have to stop them in some place. Solidarity is not just knowing that these people are doing evil stuff, but showing that we don't accept these actions. Because the moment that we do nothing, evil, if you want to use the word evil, prevail when good people do nothing. Everyone is a good person. But what happened when we do nothing? They will continue. So the power that we have is at least say we don't accept it. And this is something why solidarity is very important. Why I'm sitting here. Why I left my homeland to be here and work in Ukraine, and after that to do. Because I believe if we don't stop them, they will do bigger scale. And these people have the bigger scale. For the question that you were asking, basically, can you rephrase it in a way that it's easier for me? I was a bit passionate, sorry guys.
Should I rephrase it?
Yes, please.
Like when Ukrainians are saying that there should be justice, there should be special international tribunal for the crimes of Russia in Ukraine. Can we build upon the experience of, for example, those people who are arguing the same for the Assad and Russian crimes in Syria?
Yes, it depends on which litigation you are using. Basically, within the ICC, for example, and Rome Stata, you can't accuse a government. You need a legal personality, like a person, to build on. But there is a special efforts to push for that. You know, we know that our job at this point in our small organization, that to do two things, is to fight compassion fatigue, because, you know, as you mentioned and as Denise mentioned, that people feel tired. And sometimes when you put the same violence and the same speeches and the same war again and again, because we experience it in Syria and other places, people just get tired of being compassionate, and sometimes they even internalize the violence, the image, it's acceptable. So our job is to make sure that this is not being internalized and to fight compassion fatigue. The second thing is to make sure these people who did these crimes, especially the leadership in the Russian side, that they were active in Syria doing war crimes by disproportionate, indiscriminate attacks, by even doing instrumentalization of torture. And this is something also the Russian government and the Russian regime have a long history. Actually, they taught the Syrian regime, and they also learned from the Syrian regime. And fun fact, the Syrian regime learned how to torture from the Nazis, by the way. The last living Nazis was living in Syria happily, because we accepted such action from such a Syrian regime, even before the crisis, the current crisis. So basically, these people has to be documented. Testimonies, human-based testimonies has to be documented, and the chain of custody in each evidence we have has to be documented and kept in a way that it is in accordance to the litigation that we want to use. If it is in Germany, like the cases of Koblenz, for example, there is a list of standards we have to follow. We are trying to make sure that if the Ukrainian judicial system or the Ukrainian citizen in any capacity needed to do it as a group or as an individual, we keep their right to do such litigation by making sure we preserve their testimonies and we give them advices to push it further. I hope I did answer.
Yes, yes, thank you. Let me just address our audience. I will ask the last question, and maybe if you have questions to our speakers, you can think about them. Let me ask you, Olesa, maybe this last question for this panel. We are talking about solidarity to Ukraine, but then there is an important question, solidarity from Ukraine. And when I'm asking myself, for example, at what is happening in Israeli-Palestinian situation, I myself am saying that the Ukrainians have already this experience that we cannot just think in geopolitical terms. We cannot just think in terms of, states and big powers, because we have gone through it. We have gone through this thinking that was applying this thinking on us. Like you are just a pawn in a game between America and Russia, etc. And this kind of makes this very human suffering just erased from the table. And I think this is a very important thing in Ukraine, which should be born. I'm not sure it is being born, but I think it should be born. Like, we are survivors of these atrocities. We are people who fight against this Russian evil, and we should be on the side of the civilians. We should be on the side of victims. If this is a Hamas attack on civilians in Israel, we should be on the side of the people who were killed, this brutally killed. And when Ukrainians showed emotionally these Israeli flags, for example, on the streets, I think it is important to understand that it is not support of Israeli government or what is its policies. It's really this compassion with the victims, and the same compassion, I think, should be also with Palestinians. Do you think that this emotion is rising in Ukrainian society, that this is mature enough to go a little bit beyond its own suffering and feel the suffering of others?
Well, I think there is this feeling, and it's definitely rising, and there is definitely a discussion about not only about the compassion and help that we should be obtaining, right? But the debt that we have to be compassionate with other people and be actively in help of those who need that help. I'll give you an example from pre-invasion period, how we responded to that in my institution, and it was in the connection with Belarus and the protests in Belarus after the faked elections a couple of years ago. There were massive protests in Minsk and other cities of Belarus, and they were crashed with a lot of violence. It was not the torture as there is now in the war situation, but it was also a very, very serious torture. So what we thought that we as Ukrainian cultural and intellectual scene, if I may say, what should we do? And we've been also receiving a lot of support from Polish intellectual scene for a very long time, for decades actually, in Ukraine. So Polish cultural institutions and individuals were extremely supportive and helpful for the growth of Ukrainian cultural community. So we thought that we have the same that towards Belarusian creators. And therefore we created an exhibit which was called Каждый день, or every day, because that was the slogan that people chanted on Minsk streets, meaning that we are here every day, we are here to stay. And presented probably, as we heard from our Belarusian colleagues, the largest contemporary art exhibit by Belarusian art. All those creators, or many of them, are in exile, but by now, for the reasons that we know. But I think that's the example how we kind of tried to be on the to be only on the receiving side, but also on the giving side. And I hope this is just the beginning, and there will be more and more discussion about that.
Thank you. Denise?
I just wanted to ask you something, because a few days on Wednesday, on the beginning of the book fair, I made a presentation here on this stage with the German Minister of Culture, with Claudia Roth, and 3 Russian writers, with Dmitry Gluchovsky, Mikhail Shishkin, and Irina Sherbekova, co-founder of Memorial. And I just wanted to ask you, because you said with your colleagues from Belarus, are you in contact with, still in contact with them?
Yes, there is some contact with our colleagues from Belarus. There is, of course, no contact with the Russian art scene.
Good. Please.
You wanted to add something about the Russians.
About the Russian, it was the last discussion that we had when we meet in a hotel in Berlin, not at the war zone, it was in Berlin. And maybe talking about solidarity, it's a dialogue, it's so, it's giving concrete detail. In the beginning of the war, after the Russian attack on Ukraine, and I was at that time, I was president of the old German PAN, and we made a declaration, not in general, because it was not our style to make general declarations about political issues, but there was the discussion about boycott Russian artists and Russian culture. And we make a declaration clearly on the side of Ukraine, but against this general boycott of Russian artists. And we made this, it was kind of like a title. The enemy is Putin, not Pushkin. It sounds good, but then we get an answer from PEN Ukraine, and especially we said, okay, but not Pushkin. Especially Pushkin is not so, and it was for us, or really also a kind of learning process. So we're still talking about these things, even if you're in solidarity with you. I think it's also part of solidarity. And some things we learn, and some things we still disagree. So we had this discussion at the hotel. I asked Volodymyr, have you? What's about
Have I read Pushkin? Yes.
No, not about Pushkin, not about that. That's easy. About the dialogue with the Russian, and I asked the Russian writers here, or all of them, definitely not Putin supporters. Dmitry Gluchovsky was jailed to prison a few months before, to 8-year prison. Talking, if I say Russian writers and intellectuals, I mean that kind of Russians. I asked them if they have contact to Ukrainian colleagues and what they think about this boycott issue, and they said, all of them, they said, in person, yes, and in this boycott issue, so we understand the Ukrainian, and Irina Sherbekova said, if they're criticizing us that we have, that Putin is still in power, I've got to say, yes, the Ukrainians are right. It's our mistake. So I think also it's also part of solidarity. Go and practice is one thing, but the other thing is also to keep the dialogue and to discuss things, to learn things from each other, also to criticize sometimes, because it is not, for me, solidarity is not the point. We are coming here from the rich Germany and we bring you some stuff to Ukraine. It is, we are colleagues, and if you're in a situation you need solidarity, practical solidarity, we can try to organize, but we are colleagues, and I think it's also part of important part of solidarity to keep a dialogue, to talk, to discuss, and to learn from each other. And
we agree to disagree.
But we disagree in less points than
so,
last year.
Just I didn't want to make the discussion about solidarity with Ukraine into a discussion about Pushkin and Russian writers, but there are two aspects, and I think these are very important aspects to understand. First, there is a moral aspect. The moral aspect is that we cannot be in dialogue with representatives of Russian culture when our friends are dying on the front line. This is just the moral question. It's not about Russian writers. It's about our people. It's about our responsibility to our people. And the second question, I don't like the word boycott, but I think that we need to engage into critical thinking about Russian culture. This is something that is not really sometimes present in the Western academia. So when we are saying, for example, after Edward Said, we're saying that, and it's rightly so, that Flaubert is a great writer, but he has a clear Orientalist, imperialist motives in his novels, like Salammbô or some others. We should also think with this lens about Russian culture as well. And I think this is also a task of Russian intellectuals themselves, not only of Ukrainians. So I'm sorry to take this question for too long, but really I wanted to engage our people from the audience, if you have questions to our speakers.
We are waiting.
People,
with this pushing thing, I wouldn't repeat this like this again. I then wanted to start a discussion about this issue. I just wanted to say, because we're talking about solidarity, this also dialogue and talking and learning from each other is also part of the solidarity. That was the point that I wanted to make. And as I said, I wouldn't repeat that Pushkin expression once again.
Yes, and our position is that dialogue is a good thing, but there are certain moments when dialogue cannot work.
I'm just talking about dialogue between us.
Yeah, sure. What we're doing right now. So questions from the audience? Remarks, ideas? Okay, yes, there are questions. Good. Because I was just afraid that we have mesmerized the audience with this Pushkin debate.
I'm very sorry. For example, I will bring. It will be about Wagner, Albrecht Dürer, and Nessis. Very sorry because I live in Germany for 5 years. I'm Ukrainian, and sometimes such references are not treated properly. So I just want to give an example. You talked about solidarity. For me, was surprising that still now my colleagues, my boss, they were reluctant to tell good words about Wagner music and about pictures and artworks of Dürer. And first I didn't get why, and then I knew they were beloved artists of Hitler, but I haven't connected those things. And for me, the question, when I connected, I understood. So Germany, after the Second World War, made the homework, went through trauma, digested, and still have some maybe uncomfort with this. For me, that's the question, leave Pushkin, leave Russian composers if you like, don't cancel. But please, why not to make like it was in Germany for a few years after the war, and as we see still now for some people. Just forget Russian culture for some time and give the scene to Ukraine. It will be like a kind of support. I don't understand why, for example, I live now and work in Wiesbaden. More than half of a program of Wiesbaden theater are Russian composers. That's only one of example. So I know that it's not, I understand that it's quite complex question, but why not to do, like, why not to postpone for some time, at least until the Russian troops are out of Ukrainian territory? Thanks.
I've got to apologize. I didn't want to start this Pushkin issue. I just want, after talking about the practice with the fire trucks and so on, I just wanted to tell from another side of this practice of this solidarity. And that was the debate that we had with Ukrainian PAN after our press release. They criticized us for this. I just wanted to talk about the dialogue part of solidarity, not start this Pushkin debate. But Wagner is still, in wo sind die Spiele noch? Bayreuth is still, Wagner is not cancelled in Germany. It's a big event every year. The German Chancellor, all ministers are there at the Wagner Festival. So.
People were a kind of cancel. Germans themselves, as I understand, were canceling for them Dürer and Wagner because they just wanted not to have anything with these dirty Nazis. Why not to make something similar? Personally, I also like some Russian books, and I'm not going to burn them, but I will keep them and tell my children how to properly treat them. But not now, but maybe in 10 years and 20 years from now. I don't understand this German willingness to protect current situation.
But then there is a question of power structures, right? And maybe Olesya, you can react on this. So the question is really that still Russian culture has this domination over Ukrainian culture. We have much more Russian books, we have much more Russian arts present on the international stages, and the question of solidarity is not only a question of, we're not using the question, I'm personally not using the words boycotting or canceling, whatever, but the question is how to bring the forgotten, the unheard other cultures like Ukrainian culture, Belarusian culture, Georgian culture. Olesya, what do you think? And maybe
I am amazed how our discussion about solidarity suddenly is focused on this Russian question, and I think it shows the place that this culture has been occupying for a very long time in collective imagination on the international stage, somewhere in the center and high above. So we still, and that's obviously the result of imperial kind of understanding of the world and of imperial realpolitik as well, projected by Russia on other countries for a very, very, very long time. So obviously, we have to reflect on that. Obviously, we cannot be blind to such situation. I strongly oppose the idea that you have to silence Russian culture for the sake of Ukrainian culture. No, not for that sake. You have to reflect on that place. You have to reflect on that hierarchy. And especially we in Ukraine expected for a long time Russian intellectuals to do that, to start that work, because this is basically their task, to reflect on the predatory nature of Russian state. I hope that will start at some moment.
Raji?
From my experience, actually, I will draw on a thin line here. Like, culture is not good or bad. It's thought like Russian culture has so much morality and ethics we all share universally. So this is the first thing I want to draw. But I do understand that after 20,000 documented war crime and a list of crimes against humanity, that maybe certain elements, innocent elements, would trigger memories. For example, a certain music would remind me of the one who was torturing me in Syria. Like Kulthum is a diva, is a very famous singer in the Middle East. But one of the guys in Far'a al-Khatib, by the way, Anwar Islam is being jailed here in Germany for life. So that one of his torturers used to put music, this lady. And so many people, if they hear it now, they got traumatized. Not because she's evil, but because it's related to trigger a certain memory of torture. So I do understand that so many people have so many elements within the Russian drama, Russian culture would trigger them. I understand that. But also, we have to draw a line between when we are discussing Ukrainian identity and the culture behind it, and the Russian identity and the culture behind it, and using the Russian culture to cancel a certain element of Ukrainian culture. And this is something we are seeing it in schools. One of the things that everyone's talking about now is the deportation of kids. And the deportation here is not only just moving children from place to a place, but rather is a systematic approach where the child is being not only removed from the space that he or she was in, rather than the mental space that he or she was in. That means a certain cultural element, Ukrainian language, Ukrainian way of thinking, Ukrainian folk, that the child is not being able to access anymore. And in a certain point, the child will have, in certain cases, cognitive dissonance. We talked about it last time. And then it builds on. So the child starts to even seal his memories and confabulate new memories, maybe. So the question here is Russian culture is being used as a tool of war to target a certain population in Ukraine, like in Mariupol? Why you put like this huge cinema TV thing and you start push people to watch it? There are so many questions here that we have to look and think of. But we have to always draw a line that culture by itself is not good or bad. It is the way that is being used as a tool of war or as a tool of cancellation of a certain element within the Ukrainian identity. I just want to say that.
Thank you, Raji. It's very important. Unfortunately, we need to wrap up our discussion, and I just wanted to thank our speakers, and just to remind certain key points that the crimes that Russia is doing in Ukraine are not limited with Ukraine, and therefore we can see these crimes from Chechnya, from Syria, and there is a big danger, and this is what Ukrainians are saying, that these crimes, if this regime is not defeated in Ukraine, that they will continue. So this is the very important practical point. The second point is that we see these certain cracks in solidarity. We see the diminishing of the attention to Ukraine, and this is very dangerous. Because Ukraine is fighting so hard, but we understand that if it is left alone, if this war is forgotten, this fight will be much more difficult. Russia is being militarized, is turning into a militarized society. And the third thing I would like to stress, I think it's also very important, that sometimes we agree to disagree with our friends abroad, but it is very important that we are continuing to seek allies, to enlarge the circle of our allies, rather than starting conflicts over some specific issues, however important they might sound. Thank you very much, Raji Abdul Salam, Olesa Ostrovska, and Denise Yücel. Have a big round of applause to the speakers.